fallout continues from Tucker Carlson's visit to Russia and subsequent five-star review on TripAdvisor. Late-night comedians took pot shots at the conservative commentator, including The Daily Show's John Stewart, who accused Carlson of failing to understand the darker side of the Russian state. Let's listen.
Because the difference between our urinal-caked, chaotic subways and your candelabred, beautiful subways is the literal price of freedom. But the goal that Carlson and his ilk are pushing is that there's really no difference between our systems. In fact, theirs might be a little bit better.
Chris Cuomo from our sister channel News Nation commented on this segment, arguing that the very same Democrats who were upset with Stewart last week for criticizing Biden were now cheering at his segment making fun of Tucker Carlson. Cuomo posted, "Funny and safe, Stewart going at Biden, and Dems got him way less resonance and more sheet than he is used to. This will be widely shared by the same who came at him a week ago. Gotta pick a side if you want support. That's the game."
Meanwhile, Tucker joined the Blaze's Glenn Beck to defend himself against accusations by critics, including former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, that he's a, quote, tool of the Kremlin. Tucker told Beck, "Boris Johnson calls me a tool of the Kremlin or something, so I put in a request for an interview with Boris Johnson. Finally, one of his advisors gets back to me and says he will talk to you, but it's going to cost you $1 million. He wants $1 million. Wow, big if true. But I do think that Cuomo has a point here that obviously John Stewart gets glowing praise when he stays in really safe subjects, i.e. talking about how horrible Putin and Russia is, and that everybody, like people like Tucker Carlson, who I don't want to go too far because I do think that I obviously don't have identity of interest with Tucker Carlson politically, but outside of Tucker, anybody who is interested in talking about any of the broader context for the invasion of Ukraine, whether or not the West also reneged on its side of the deal in terms of pledging not to expand NATO and the like, anyone who wants to point to any of those sorts of historical facts, inclusive of Tucker Carlson, are labeled Putin puppets, regardless of whether or not that's a true claim. Sure. Moreover, I think that the segment is especially problematic because the very thing, and I said this on our show when we covered the Tucker segment initially, the very thing that John Stewart is making fun of here, he says the price of our freedom is the difference between a nice subway and a bad subway. It's completely antithetical to the more soft socialist, democratic socialist values he purports to adopt in other kind of circumstances. The Moscow subway was built under a communist system in which there was a lot of pride in demonstrating that good things could be for the people as well, that you could make a beautiful space for public use and not just keep all of the riches and the glory and the well-designed spaces for the moneyed elites. And so then to take that core principle, which in and of itself is a good one and something that we should be proud of in the United States of America, right? When we have Grand Central Station, when we have some of the few good public works that haven't been torn down from the golden era of public works and investment in our own public infrastructure, we say those are a good thing. We don't say, oh my gosh, Putin somehow made the subways nice and that we should somehow celebrate the fact that we have, Pizza Rat in the New York subway system? Well,
I don't agree with John Stewart at all here, although I'm probably coming at it from a different angle than you are. Yeah, having terrible public transportation is not the price of freedom. It is public transportation. It's government run. It should be run efficiently and effectively.
Right.
Like there's nothing freedom-y about it. It's the public service, and expecting money that is appropriated from the taxpayers to be spent on services that are nice and safe and benefit them is nothing. The freedom part is not. There's no freedom in that. You have to pay your taxes, and we want them spent well to develop nice public transportation infrastructure that a lot of other countries, frankly, even a lot of poorer countries, have than us. When I was in Italy in the fall, again, it is a poorer country than the U.S. There's a lot less economic opportunity. There's a lot of ways in which it is not as nice a place to live as the U.S., although it has a lot of great history and things to visit. But I found the public transportation system, frankly, cleaner and nicer and easier to use than the public transportation system here. So I'm not surprised that Tucker had that experience. I think he should have watched out more for having blinders on. He's only being shown what they're showing him in Moscow, which is like the wealthiest city in Russia anyway. I was looking up some statistics. It is still the case that most Russians live in greater poverty than most people in the U.S., which is not to say everything's perfect in the U.S. and we shouldn't do any work, but we do have to, be realistic and tell the truth that the average American home size is larger, that we have a larger percentage of homes with indoor plumbing than Russia, that food costs there the food costs less, but people pay more of their income toward buying food in Russia. So let's certainly celebrate the good that they've been able to accomplish, and I'm all for Tucker, calling into question some of these narratives about the war with Ukraine and how vital it is that Ukraine win back every inch of territory. But let's be a little bit more careful.
Yeah, I mean, my frustration is mostly that the drive to appeal to a liberal audience has caused him to stumble in this odd and predictable way and undermine his own values. In the 1930s and 40s, when there was across the world a bigger commitment in one's own public infrastructure and less income inequality, where there were active communist and socialist movements that pressured our own government to compromise with labor protections, the social safety net, where we got all of the incredibly popular programs that are hanging on by a thread today, like Medicare and Social Security and the like, in the following years, are all because there were much more radical movements that were frankly asking for more. And there was a bigger expectation that CEOs would not be as indifferent to the broader social implications of their profit. The kind of profit is king mentality that has emerged in the 80s and after was not, in fact, the prevailing instinct of the day. And that's why we see so many of our public works projects as well that are labeled Carnegie and all of these great, but wealthy oil barons and the like, who felt like to buy public buy-in, to be able to be as rich as they were when so many people were so poor, that they had to very publicly give back in these sorts of ways. And there was this idea that there was a push and pull that was happening here. And so you can never imagine John Stewart saying something that is arguably true, like, wow, a billionaire oligarch named Jackie Kennedy Onassis swooped in and built Grand Central Terminal and made it so ornate and so beautiful, and that's why there's no freedom in America. I mean, there is a critique there about why there is a Kennedy legacy and why it is that our presidents all seem to have the same names over and over and over again, and why it is that one woman's dream to have a beautiful train station has more impact in preserving a historical train station than a municipality can. There's some real criticism there, but you would never catch John Stewart making the same kind of criticism of Tucker and Moscow about their train stations being beautiful as you very well could make about an American train station that was saved from demolition only because some extremely wealthy woman stepped in and said, hey, this is pretty, let's keep it that way.
Yeah, and I think people don't understand the extent to which there is just this gross mismanagement that maybe occurs in other countries and in other countries' governments. But I remember reading about I think it was for the New York subway system a few years ago. They brought in a transportation expert, I believe European, who had helped remodel the systems there and had had a lot of success. They hired him, they brought him in, and it was impossible to implement because you had to get so many regional authorities and this authority and you couldn't do the paperwork that it would allow the kind of transformative change that would make our public infrastructure better. We're handicapping
that's another good point, and you're not going to like what my solution is to that. I mean, it is very
Mine is to privatize it. That's not your solution.
But no, that's the problem is that it was privatized. So the reason why, for example, the New York subway system is so Byzantine is because there were a number of different private manufacturers that were building the system. That's why you have so much overlap and duplicativeness within various lines that run alongside each other from much of the same tracks of the city, that they were actively competing with each other for passengers along the same lines to and from the same places. And when you see updates to the New York City system that happens like on this line but not that line, they were able to get bigger cars on this line but not that line, it's because there wasn't uniformity between the choices that were being made in the design and construction of various lines that were being owned by various people. Now they've come all under the same ownership, obviously in the MTA, but they're still dealing with untangling that. And now there's all these miles of tracks that some of the overlap is good, right? You like that, there's different ways to get to different parts in the city, but it is nowhere near the most efficient version of a system that would be designed if it were kind of done via city, urban, municipal planning, as opposed to various capitalists trying to compete with each other to design the network.
I'm gonna have to do more research to be able to respond to that.
Look into it, and I also encourage a visit to the New York City Transit Museum, which is very fun and informative.
The New York subway system, for all its faults, still better in my book than the DC subway system, which is a little bit cleaner and way worse in every other
It is
way.
cleaner, but it doesn't no one takes you where you need to go like the New York City subway system.
All right, we'll have more Rising right after this.